Hello, friends, fellow Canadians. I'm Christopher M. Michaud. Welcome to the podcast. This is The Canadianist. So, Canada is in a technical recession. That's the headline, anyway. The first thing we should probably do is explain what that actually means because the word technical is doing a lot of work in that sentence. A technical recession simply means that the economy has contracted for two consecutive quarters. That's it. Two quarters in a row where economic activity was slightly smaller than it was before. Economists use the term because it gives them a clear and consistent definition. And the reason they're not simply saying recession is that when most Canadians hear the word recession, they picture something much more dramatic. They picture widespread layoffs, businesses closing, people losing their homes, and economic panic. What we're seeing today is not necessarily that. What we're seeing is an economy that has met a specific statistical definition. Whether that technical recession becomes something larger remains to be seen. Predictably, the political reaction was immediate. Pierre Poilievre blamed the Liberals. The Liberal supporters pointed towards global economic uncertainty, trade disruptions, and international conditions. The debate quickly became the debate we always seem to have in this country. One side says it's the government's fault. The other side says the government inherited difficult circumstances or was hit by factors beyond its control. And as I was reading through all of this over the weekend, I found myself asking a very different question. Not because the political arguments aren't valid, they are. Governments deserve scrutiny. Opposition parties should challenge governments, and that's how democracy works. What struck me, however, was how little of this actually felt surprising. We've been hearing warnings about productivity for years. We've been hearing warnings about business investments for years. We've been hearing warnings about housing shortages, healthcare capacity, infrastructure pressures, affordability, and the growing disconnect between population growth and our ability to support that growth. None of these concerns appeared suddenly, and none of them arrived out of nowhere. So when I hear that Canada has entered a technical recession, my first reaction isn't shock. My first reaction is to wonder why course corrections seem so difficult in this country. If we could see those problems coming, why were we unable to change direction sooner? And that's the question that interests me. Now, before someone accuses me of defending the Liberals, let's address that directly. The Trudeau government was in power for nearly a decade. Many of the trends we're discussing today emerged or worsened during those years. That's simply reality. If you're the government, you own the record. That's true whether we're talking about the Liberals, the Conservatives, or any other party. At the same time, Mark Carney has now been Prime Minister for more than a year. He simply isn't an observer of these events. He's the Prime Minister. He owns part of the current situation as well. So, what's interesting, however, is that we're immediately drawn into debate over personalities. The conversation becomes a debate over individuals. I'm not convinced that that's where the most important answers are. Because if we step back for a moment, many of these issues have survived changes in leaders, changes in cabinets, ministers, and changes in political messaging. The housing crisis didn't begin because of one speech, and the productivity problem didn't appear just because of one budget. Healthcare didn't suddenly become strained because of one election. These are long term issues. They developed over years, some of them over decades. And that brings me to what I think is really going on underneath all of this. The recession itself may not be the story. The story may be that Canada's political system struggles to make major corrections once a particular direction has been established. Think about how often we hear that a government won a strong majority. Then we look at the actual vote totals. In many cases, we're talking about governments that received somewhere around 40% of the popular vote. 40% then becomes 60% or more in the seats in parliament. That government gains enormous power to set the direction of the country for years at a time. Now, every major party benefits from this when it's their turn. It's not a liberal problem. It's not a conservative problem. It's a structural feature of the system. The question we should be asking is whether that structure still serves Canada as well as it once did. When warning signs emerge, does Parliament contain enough diverse voices to challenge assumptions and force course corrections? When policies aren't producing the desired results, are there sufficient mechanisms to adjust direction before the problems become entrenched. When large portions of the electorate vote for parties that never come close to power, are we missing perspectives that might actually improve decision making? These are not easy questions, and they're not partisan questions. They're institutional questions. The conservatives will argue that liberal policies created the current situation. Many liberals will argue that external factors deserve a larger share of the blame. Both arguments contain elements of truth. What interests me is something larger. Why do we seem to spend so much time debating who's responsible for the fire and so little time discussing why the smoke alarms didn't work? That's the conversation I think Canada needs to have. Because governments come and go. Prime ministers, they come and go as well. And political parties rise and fall. The institutions, however, remain. If Canadians are increasingly dissatisfied with the outcomes they're seeing, perhaps the most important question isn't who should govern next. Perhaps the more important question is whether the systems through which we govern are evolving quickly enough to meet the challenges of modern Canada. That is a conversation worth having. And it's one we'll continue right here on The Canadianist. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss the next episode. I'm Christopher M. Michaud. I'm a Canadianist. And if this resonates with you, I invite you to continue the conversation at thecanadianist.news. And to find out more about the United Canadian Centrist Party and our vision for Canada's future, visit uccparty.ca. See you next time.